The season finale of the Producer Podcast is here as we're jumping on the bandwagon to discuss a topic that has exploded exponentially the past couple of years, AI. To do that, I'm excited to welcome back Brannon Hollingsworth of Brainy Pixel to the show. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Brannon, for coming back onto the Producer Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Michael, for having me on. It's always a pleasure and an honor, my good man.
So today we're talking AI, and that's something that like everybody in the industry is talking. You can't go anywhere and not run into it. But I really enjoyed the panel and that you did at the film festival this past year, where you were kind of starting to explore a lot of that.
You mean the Christian Worldview Film Festival in Albany, Georgia, that everyone needs to go to?
Yes, that one.
It is a great festival. It's my favorite festival. So,
But yeah, and so I think, and for me, I've probably heard a lot of this, but maybe just kind of start by sharing kind of what drew you and Brainy Pixel into really exploring the world of AI.
okay. Do you want me to tell people a little bit about who Brainy Pixel is, or just assume they're going to know?
Yeah, maybe do a refresher. That
Okay.
way, people who are new to the podcast have an idea.
Awesome. So I'm Brannon Hollingsworth, and I am Brainy Pixel's Chief Operations Officer and Chief Creative Officer. One hat I like to wear, one hat I really rather not wear, but I'll let you figure that out. And we are a Christian animation and production studio primarily based out of North Alabama in the United States of America. And anything that is beautiful and glorifies God, we like to do it. So whether it's writing or whether it's music or whether it's animation or comics or children's storybooks or illustrations, we like to dabble in all those things. And so naturally, when AI, and let me define my terms as any good Christian apologist should, the AI that I'm speaking of today and that I have just a little bit of experience in is really generative AI in terms of specifically creating visual imagery. There's lots of different slices of AI. And so when you start talking AI, you really have to narrow down to what your specific application is, because there's so much that AI is doing and really has been doing over the past several years. I mean, if you type, when you start typing in Google search or your email and it kind of has interpretive, suggestions that pop up, that's a form of artificial intelligence. So it's really important we define our terms. But since we are a creative production house and we are always looking for ways to create animation more effectively and more cost effectively, but also just in terms of time and schedule, and also really unlock creativity. As generative AI became more available to the end user, we kind of had this kind of spiritual quandary. So on one hand, we're artists and we want to utilize all these amazing tools like Photoshop and Illustrator and character animator and Blender and Maya. We want to use these tools, but as AI begins to infiltrate them and starts adding capability, we're like, well, where do we stand from our ethical and our theological groundings? Where do we stand as artists? And all those answers were not very clear. So we began this season of prayer, and really it was a couple of years ago that we started really thoroughly praying about this quandary, and we felt that the safest track, the safest path, the less risk averse was probably the best, being business owners and not wanting to be sued and things of that nature. And so we kind of rocked along for several months like that, and then we really received some conviction based on a post that a gentleman made about not having a spirit of fear when it comes to AI. And we were like, you know what? We really need to pray about that. And so we began seeking God's face again, trying to understand what he wanted us to do with AI. And we came to the realization that AI is really just a tool. It's like email, or it's like a hammer. And you can do really great things with a hammer, or you can also do really bad things with a hammer. But it's not the hammer's fault, right? the hammer isn't evil or good. The hammer just is a tool that you can utilize in a various and sundry way. And so we began to view AI as that. And we then said, okay, well, if this is a tool, then we've got to figure out the way to use it ethically and morally and biblically so that it's not causing harm to people, so that it's not doing evil in the world. And so we began what is now probably a 15 or 16-month journey into really deep diving AI, what it is, how we could use it or not use it in a way that glorifies God. It's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'd love to like touch on next because you kind of brought up the ethical side of AI and like
Yeah, sure.
more like for you guys, what questions do you ask yourselves to figure out is this going to be an ethical use
hmm
of AI?
Well, so luckily, we've seen a lot of this really already changing in the market, praise God. But when AI first really started becoming prolific on the web, the way that AI works is that it essentially references large stores of data, whether that's text data, whether that's image data, or whether it's both. And it uses that to then build new inferences, right? So new impressions of that existing source data. AI can't create anything on its own. Um, AI in a vacuum really would never be able to do anything. But it's when you give it raw materials. And so for us, one of our biggest concerns right off the bat, really from an ethical and legal standpoint, is say if we create a comic book based using AI art, but that art that we're referencing is someone else's copyright, right? Well, where do we stand, right, as a business? But then also, where do we stand as believers? Um, is that something we could sell and make money off of? Is that something we could even produce and put our name on? It would be like stealing someone's art and then kind of copying it or making a variant of it and then going out and selling a book based on that. So that was the first real light bulb for us was going, okay, well, we've got to limit the data sources, right? The
Mhm.
sources that the tools are using has to be limited. And so that then led us down a path of, all right, well, how do we do that? Luckily, a lot of the AI tools that are out there are open source, or at least the kernels of those tools are open source. So you can pull that down. And if you know how, you can create your own version of those tools, which is why we see a whole plethora of these tools in the market. This is what everyone's doing. They're kind of creating their own little version of these. There's like three primary core kernels. But then when we created ours, we're like, we want to limit what it can see, and we want to limit it to stuff that either we own, right, that we've created from whole cloth, it's our content, or that we own. So we've paid someone for something, right? Maybe an image that we contracted someone to make for us, or maybe it's a like a stock art, license that we have. Stuff that's publicly free on the web, so in the public domain, clearly there's lots of amazing art out there on the web that, is old enough to be in the public domain or that it's under the Creative Commons license so that people can use it for profit without having to provide any sort of monetary, compensation or any sort of attributions. And so that's all we're going to use for our source data in terms of images. The same goes for text as well. And you'd be surprised. There's lots and lots of this stuff that's available to you on the web. Think about every museum that you've ever been to, right? For the most part, all that stuff that's in the museum is in the public domain, so you can leverage that. Wikipedia is a tremendous resource. Everything on Wikipedia is a potential source data point that we could use. So that was really, kind of the epiphany moment is that, oh, well, there's way more out there that we could use legally, ethically, morally, and not get any sort of gray area on. And then let's just start there and see what we can do. And it had some pretty surprising results when we began doing some testing.
Nice. That's cool. And yeah, it's been encouraging to see just all the ways these companies are starting to put more of these safeguards in place. And
Yeah, and there are a lot of the major purveyors of AI software, they're seeing this trend as well, right? They're going, okay, we don't want to get sued. There are already lawsuits that are, in work that have, been filed. And so a lot of these major companies are going, we got to make an ethical version of this because we don't want to, be sued for billions of dollars and have to pay damages and things of that nature. So I think we were just a few months ahead of the curve, maybe.
Hmm.
Praise God because of our because of our biblical insight, and we wanted to do things right. And we're seeing a lot of people follow that path, not because we're doing it, because they probably don't know who we are, but I think it's the logical way that the business world is going to have to go in order to keep these tools viable.
Yeah, for sure. I guess my next kind of question for you is as you've been, researching AI and kind of keeping up with it,
Mhm.
what are maybe some of the common misconceptions that you see
Sure,
people
sure.
having about it?
Well, first of all, is that the first thing is that AI, can't create anything on its own. A lot of people think that AI is this supreme intelligence, this evil overlord that's going to take over the universe. And, elements of it may at some point. That's not outside the realm of possibility because it's directly dependent upon the tools that you give AI, the access that you give AI, and the empowerment, right? It could become something that spirals out of control. But by itself, AI is it's kind of like a baby.
Yeah.
It can't really do a lot by itself. So as you start feeding it information and data sources and you start allowing it access to different areas of the web or, different websites, it starts understanding and analyzing things because that's what it's built to do. It's built to analyze and understand and then predict. So that's probably the first thing is that AI can't really do anything in and of itself unless you enable it to do so. The second thing is that a big misconception is that all AI is the same or it's the same AI. It's not this one big thing, right? These tool sets are very stovepiped, right? They're very
Hmm.
siloed. They exist within certain stovepipes or certain swim lanes is what we would call it in the government space, right?
Okay.
A swim lane is just like in a pool, right? It's a specific area and you've got it cordoned off and you can't cross the lines. So a lot of these tools are very swim lane. Some are not, but many of them are. And really that's to keep them contained from a security standpoint, but also just so the code is manageable. Because very quickly as you begin to feed these things information and give it access to data, the code base becomes really, really unmanageable really, really rapidly. So that's the second one is that not all AI is connected and it's not all just one big thing lurking out there on the internet. There's lots of little tools. It would be analogous to there are lots of email programs like Gmail and Hotmail and, you know, proto mail. All those things do the same sort of thing. They do it in a slightly different way, and they can all communicate back and forth if you allow them to. So it's similar to that. It's more complicated, but it's similar. It's a simple way to think of it. And I think the last major misconception is that at least right now, AI is not going to take over the planet. It's not going to start building robots that, it's not the sci-fi thing that we all love to watch, with Terminator and, all these various and sundry sci-fi films. It's not there at this point. Now, could it get there? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think it could get there. And one of the most amazing things about AI to me is the rapidity at which the tool sets and the capabilities are growing. I mean, just 5 months ago, we were scratching our heads going, wow, it would be great to be able to get consistent characters, and get a lot of consistency from a character from an AI generated image. And now that's almost commonplace just 5 months, right? So who
Hmm.
knows a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what the capabilities of the software can do. So I would say that's probably the biggest ones. And then of course, my father-in-law thinks AI is the devil incarnate. So
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, so I mean, as you've kind of covered, like AI is everywhere. It's not just in these very film specific tools. But I guess maybe looking more specifically like at filmmakers, the film industry, like what are some of the current challenges that you guys are running into with AI?
Yeah, and again, AI is everywhere, right? People don't realize it's on your phones, right? As you're typing and things are being suggested to you, that is a form of AI, and it's going to become more so. I know that Apple has a new phone now with Apple Intelligence that's all powered by AI on the back end. So yeah, it's becoming more and more prevalent because it's a time-saving tool, right? And sad as it is, our world is all about, stuffing as much as you can in an 8 to 10 to 12 to 24-hour day. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, sadly. But you asked specifically about the challenges that we're seeing in terms of the generative AI that we're using.
Mhm.
One of the biggest challenges is consistency of character, right? So for us, we're an animation studio and we love doing comics. And so while AI is great at making really cool landscapes and spaceships and creatures and things like that, you tend to see this weird warping or morphing from frame to frame
Mhm.
oftentimes. And that's simply something that you can't do for a comic or for an animation and really have your audience be totally bought in, right? They might watch it because it's cool, it's something new or novel. But in terms of really delivering a performance or telling a very powerful story, it's really hard when your main character looks different from frame to frame, right? It's hard to follow.
Right.
It's hard to invest in that character. So finding that path to consistency is a huge challenge. And even as I said earlier in the podcast, there are some new tool sets that have come out, some new applications of ways to use LoRa's and data sets where you can get more consistency, and it's getting really good. But that's a really big challenge. And it's because, again, AI doesn't intuitively understand what these objects are on that it's generating.
Hmm.
They're just collections of pixels to the software. And so it doesn't understand, oh, that's a face. I have to keep that face consistent because that face equals a person or a character. And to AI, it's just a bunch of pixels, right? And the software is getting better at interpreting those things, but you have to really work hard at training them to make sure that happens. So consistency is a big, big problem. And then also stylistic consistency is a major challenge. One of the first discoveries that we had is we're kind of creating our ethical AI, where we're creating basically it's like a sandboxed AI that has very limited access to stores of data. We
Hmm.
saw because we had a limited number of inputs that mathematically restricted the number of outputs that we were seeing as we're generating new images. And so as a result, the AI had less to look at, it had less to reference. And so it kept being self-referential. And we wound up getting more consistency as a result because it wants to put something out. And if it doesn't know, it starts looking at previous things that it's done. And so that was a really interesting discovery. So it's almost like, the web, you go out to any of these tools on the web and they've got access to just about every image that's ever been made on the internet. And so you see these very wide sweeps in terms of visual consistency from one frame to another. Like one frame, you got a guy with two eyes and glasses, and the next frame, one of the glasses turns into an eyeball and then it grows a tentacle. And it's because you have these infinite number of inputs. And so the AI is just like, oh, just throw anything in there, right? Just throw anything in there and it'll work. So limiting those inputs is really, we've seen a lot of internal consistency being built. But those two things are really, really challenging in the world of film and animation and comics because those mediums are all about storytelling. And storytelling is dependent upon some level of consistency. Even wild and crazy movies like, Inception, right? Which is all about mind bending and, changing your perception of reality. You don't see buildings turning into giant feet, right? Because that doesn't make sense to the story. That's what AI wants to do. But as storytellers, we have to learn to creative boundaries around the things that change and understand why they change. Because our
Hmm.
audience has to understand why these things are changing, or they get lost and confused and they don't connect with the message. So those are really big challenges. And I don't think they're going away anytime soon with AI. I think they will remain. It's probably years that they will remain, but I would imagine in 5 years or so, those probably won't be barriers anymore. Could be sooner. Just the path that we're seeing right now, um, I would say it's probably about 5 years, and that nut will be cracked, and we'll be able to do amazing things with AI for film and animation and comics. Until then, there's still a pretty big hill to climb.
Okay. So just as a fun question I gotta ask, since
Sure.
you're designing kind of your generative AI is more restricted,
Yeah.
uh, has that helped it do hands any better than most of these AI programs?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, it has. And what we've actually found, it's less about being restrictive and it's more about providing um, very specific reference material for things like hands. I think as well, one of the things I might have shown at Christian Worldview was we created a character who had this very complex bandolier. Right,
Hmm.
we took some video reference actually of me dressed up in this thing, this character who had a very complex bandolier, and so we actually had to build a LoRa, which is like a visual database, right? We had to build a LoRa for that specific item. And once we were able to tell the AI, hey, anytime you see this thing on this dude, reference this LoRa, reference this little database where it had, very specific keywords and very specific descriptions and images of that thing. And then it just like, okay, I get it. I know what that is now. And it started creating it consistently over and over again. And so they were like, well, could we do that with hands? And so we did the same thing. We created a LoRa just for hands. And yeah, we started seeing a lot of consistency in hands. And honestly, I think even just on the web, kind of the open tools, even the non-ethical stuff, I think we're seeing a lot better generative AI when it comes to things like hands, people with beards. It really doesn't I'm like the perfect model to throw AI a crazy loop because I've got hands and a beard and glasses. It's like it doesn't understand any of those things. So,
Yeah.
but it's getting better. It really is. But I think it's because people are understanding we need to teach the AI what a hand is and that there are rules for a hand. You don't just suddenly sprout extra fingers, right? And again, that's about giving the AI the proper information at the proper time and the proper reference so that it can interpretively generate the next sequence of images. So,
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, Kind of jumping back, almost the opposite of that question I asked, like what are some of the current challenges? A couple other producers I've talked to, they want to know what are the good things or the things they can
sure.
actually be excited about with AI
Mhm.
in the industry. Because most people are all just like, oh, we're gonna lose our jobs and all of that.
That's a really good question. And there's not a very easy or a very rote answer that I think I could give for that. I like to compare AI to email. So many of you, people your age, don't understand that there was a time in the world before email existed. I know it's hard for you to believe,
Hmm.
but there was a point in time where actually we would send letters and put them in envelopes, and that's how we would communicate. So many people. I can remember this very clearly because I was in the IT field when email first became a thing. And so many people like, oh, we're going to lose our jobs, right? Email is going to replace us. We're not going to be able to, they're not going to need anybody to send mail anymore or put, stamps on envelopes or run to the post office, right? And I don't know a single person who ever lost their job because of email. As a matter of fact, email created more jobs, right? Because you have so much more information now that's being passed around and processed. We're just doing it a different way. So it frees up those people who were working in those fields, right? And there were whole people that were office managers and office assistants and things like that. And those people thought, well, we're going to lose our jobs. No, they didn't lose their jobs. They were just now freed up to do more stuff that their boss really needed them to do as well. And I think to a degree, AI is going to be like that. Now, can AI create concepts really rapidly and generate 50 ideas based on a prompt more rapidly than any artist ever could? Absolutely, no doubt about it. But what I think is going to happen is what's that's going to enable the concept artists to do is then to take those kind of seeds that AI uses and then extrapolate them and grow those worlds. Because I don't know about you, but every director I talk to, right, every screenwriter that I talk to, every set designer that I talk to, they what do they wish they had when it comes to designing their productions? They wish they had more drawings. They wish
Hmm.
they had more reference, right? Because that art allows them to really dream about and think about the world in a different way that they're trying to show their audience. And the audience might not ever see those things, right? But the people that are working on the film really need it. And so I think what it's going to do is it's going to create a base of really rapid generation of a concept that then allows all the artists, the production artists and the character designers and the prop designers and the clothing, the costume designers to then go and create those things, right? Build those things. AI is not going to be building anything in the real world anytime soon. And if you're just doing art, I think it's going to give you a launching place to go, oh, that's a really cool idea, but what if we did this, that, or the other? One of the things that AI is not very good at is coming up with ideas out of whole cloth, right? It
Hmm.
requires someone inputting something into it. Somebody's got to come up with those ideas to begin with, and I think we're just going to need more and more of those creative people. And I think that it's going to be analogous to what we saw, in the early, 1900s, we'll say, the mid 1900s when email first came out, 1970s, I guess. Whereas people aren't going to lose their jobs, they're just going to be enabled to go do different areas of their jobs in tremendous new ways. I think it's going to open up a lot of vistas, and I think it's going to accelerate creativity, which is definitely something that I don't think is a bad thing.
Yeah, for sure. So this kind of branches off of, what you were talking about there, like how concept artists can use AI to get more prompts.
Mhm.
But like with your experience, like what advice do you have to other producers out there about deciding whether this is something that they should involve AI in, or should they
Mhm.
stick to the tried and true route that we've
That's a
done
great
for
question.
years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something that I touched on um, at the Christian worldview when I presented is that ultimately it's going to come down to making ethical decisions about your production, right? And how you want to leverage AI as a time saver versus employing people, right? That's what it's really going to come down to is do you value people more than you value profits? And that's a decision that we all have to make, that movie makers have to make, that businessmen and women have to make, that podcast hosts have to make. Um, and I can't imagine that anyone, at least for the Christian worldview, is ever going to value the dollar more than they value that person being on set or being part of their production. So I encourage producers, I encourage movie makers and filmmakers to begin to understand AI and how it can um, augment their process, but not replace the people in that process.
Hmm.
So one of the things we love to do, for instance, is we'll like to generate a whole kind of suite of kind of what we call seed images, right? Just kind of early concepts, and then hand those to our concept artists because it's much quicker and easier for you to hand an artist a picture and go, hey, can you create something kind of in this style? Or can you create like, hey, here's a single character. Can you create a turnaround based on this front image or this three quarters image? Or can you create what this character's family might look like? Right. And it's much quicker than typing all that out or having a meeting. So again, I think there are areas where you can leverage AI to accelerate your process without excluding the critical people that you need on board to bring your vision to life.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I guess kind of connected to that. There's so much out there about AI. How do you even keep up with like what might be the best tools, for your project or your company to be investing in?
Yeah, that is a real challenge. That is yeah. I don't have an answer for that because we grapple with that. Um, for us, luckily, we've got a couple of folks on our team that they're just AI junkies, right? They're just living and breathing this stuff. They can't wait for the next podcast to come out. They can't wait for the next YouTube video to drop or the next, tool, revision to happen. They just kind of live, breathe, eat, sleep this stuff. That's what we found is the best way is to enable those people to do what they love to do and stay up to speed on this AI stuff because no one person can do it by themselves. It's simply too much. It's happening too fast. Um, that's actually one reason why the internet is so great because a lot of times the kind of it acts as a great filter, right? The great stuff will rise to the top, the cream will rise to the top, and the other stuff will kind of fall off the radar. Generally speaking, it's a huge generalization, but it's often true. And then enable someone on your team who's already fascinated by AI to just like, hey, I want you to keep up with this, right? And when something new comes up and you think I need to know, let me know. And that might be the producer, it might be the director. From in our case, it's not. We've got a couple of I call them AI heads. They're huge nerds, huge super geeks. I love them to death. They're my brothers from another mother, and they're all about this stuff, and it's all they want to talk about. It's all they want to kind of track down, and they love it. And so I'm like, yes, keep up with it. I might not understand it all, but you understand it, and that's great. Tell me what I need to know. Keep me up to speed, and they do, and because they love it. So I think that's the best way that we found to practically keep up with it. Otherwise, it's just too much. I would love it if there was a single AI hub or
Mhm.
something on the web. It hasn't emerged yet. I'm surprised it hasn't. But something like that would be really handy to be able to kind of keep track up with all the AI news that's happening. Maybe some smart person listening to this podcast will create that and get rich. But just send me 1% if you do it. But yeah, I would say that's probably the best way and that's kind of our philosophy anyway at Brainy is we don't find an amazing watercolorist and then ask them to do 3D development and design
Mhm.
because that's putting a round peg into a square hole, right? It's a horrible, horrible way to do anyone. We try and find people who are passionate about doing things, right? Whether they be 3D modeling and design or 2D animation or character animation or whatever. And then we try and enable them by paying them to go do what God has made them to do. And we get much, much better results that way than trying to force someone into doing something. I mean, you don't want to bring someone on a podcast who hates public speaking, right? It's the most painful thing for everyone, right? So
Mhm.
bring on somebody like me who can't shut up, right? That's the way you do it, right? And then you just wind them up and let them go.
So obviously you have your generative AI that you guys have kind of been building up. So I guess still kind of sticking on that tool concept, what are maybe some of the main tools or most common tools you guys are out there using?
Oh, that's probably a question for some of those AI heads. They would have to tell you the secret sauce. They've told me before. It's not like they're hiding it from me. They've told me,
Hmm.
but it's just so far above my head. I just can't remember, Micah. I'm sorry. I would love to answer it for you, but I can't. I do know that there are a couple, like we've down selected a couple of times the specific tool sets. But what happens is when one of these tools changes, often it will break our system. And so we've kind of cobbled together a bit of a Frankenstein for our ethical AI. And so it's kind of a smattering of a lot of the primary tools with a lot of data backend and a lot of very specific um, prompting, right? The
Hmm.
prompts and the way prompts, it's almost like coding, right? A lot of people don't know this, for instance, but like in Gmail, you can do specific types of searches with specific prompts in Gmail. So you can find a specific email with a certain subject line across a certain date range if you know the
Hmm.
proper way to type in that search prompt, and it'll pull it right up, right? A lot of people don't know that, and they just can't find anything in their email. So with AI, it's very much like this. If you give it the right prompt, it is very good at delivering to you what you're asking for. And so a lot of what we have found and a lot of the secret sauce for us is getting very, very good at developing those prompts.
Hmm.
And you'll see there's actually a lot of work out there now for prompt engineers, because that is the steering wheel to get good AI results, is understanding the way the language needs to be asked a question. If you just kind of ask it a random question, you're probably going to get a very random result. But if you're
Yeah.
very specific and intentional in your prompting, then you will get very, very dramatic results. And that's a lot of what we're able to do at Brainy. It's less about the tools, it's more about the way you query those tools.
Hmm. Yeah. So like what you're talking about there, getting good at having those really good prompts. Is that just something that if people want to get good at that, you just got to like sit there at the AI and just plug away for hours or
I think it's more about understanding the way the tools are built, right? And so
Mhm.
you need a little bit of coding knowledge, I think, to understand that. Luckily, our guys have that. As I said, they're kind of geeks and nerds. They're kind of code heads, right? And so understanding a little bit about the machine languages that are used to develop these, whether it's C++ or COBOL or whatever, understanding the way the tools are put together and the way the data sets exist and the way the data sets are keyword and classified, that helps you. Um, so it's a little bit of a dark art, right? Just like some programming languages to begin with. But once you learn the patterns, that then will enable you to begin kind of freestyling a little bit. Once you learn the structure of those prompts, then you can start expanding and getting better and cooler results.
I just have a few more questions for you, kind of wrapping things up
Cool.
here. First one is just like you personally, what are you excited about when it comes to the future of AI?
Um, I am super excited about the day when we can create consistent characters. I would love to be able to generate, lots of amazing stories and comics and an animation using really cool characters, who are actually delivering real performances, right? Very expressive characters. A lot of the AI characters seem a little bit dead, and a little bit flat. And so getting that nuanced performance is a big going to be the next big hill after you get consistent characters. Then you're going to have to get consistent, nuanced performances. So I think really that when we get to that point where we can really deliver something that feels like a human maybe worked on it or had
Hmm.
their hand in it, that's going to be a very, very exciting day because that's going to open up a lot of storytelling possibilities. And I don't know that AI will ever get to the point where it can equal like a human animator, right? Because human animators ultimately what they're looking at is they're looking at other humans' performances, right? They're looking at
Yep.
their own performance, or they're referencing something somewhere, or they're acting it out themselves. And that's something that AI, of course, will never be as human. And understanding what those emotions generate, in a face or in a pose or something like that. I think AI will be able to kind of get in the neighborhood, but it'll always be about a 70 to 80% solution. Very similar to motion capture. We do a lot of motion capture with at Brainy Pixel, and you would think, hey, I'm putting on a suit like Andy Serkis,
Hmm.
it's got sensors or dots on it, and I'm acting like Gollum, right? I'm crawling around on rocks and catching fish. But the data that you get invariably is not as good as that performance. And so you always have to clean that data up and go back and look at your reference, which is why they film all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
When you watch the behind the scenes for all these movies and they're spending all that time videoing the motion capture, it's because they need that reference later because there are nuances that the data simply can't capture in a facial performance or in a human performance. And it's because a computer isn't as cool and as nuanced as people are. That's just truth of the matter. And, so
Yes. Since you brought up motion capture, I'm just curious, like, are
sure.
you guys using AI with your motion capture stuff at all?
Not right now. We're not. We're up to our eyeballs just trying to get the motion capture software to work consistently the way we want it to and give us the performances that we need. We have not yet broached the horizon of bringing AI into that. And honestly, I don't even know how that would work right now, other than
Mhm.
maybe if we could have AI generate some backgrounds for us or something of that nature. But trying to marry a motion capture performance plus AI, I don't even know if it could help you, honestly. That's a good thought, though. I have to start thinking about that.
Yeah.
I'll give you 1%. So,
Sounds good. Oh. Yeah. So then this next question isn't AI related. It's the question I've been asking all the guests this season, but is on kind of just the topic of like social media and how you guys at Brainy have found social media to either be a help or a hindrance in what you guys do.
right. That's a great question. So, I have a personal opinion that I'll keep to myself. But so for us, social media as a company has been, it's a huge lift. First of all, it's a lot of work. And what we will tell people who are just getting into this industry, or they're just maybe creating an IP or a property that they want to promote on social media, is that understand what you're getting into, because it's kind of like a hamster wheel. And once you get on, you can't ever really get off, right? It's
Hmm.
really hard to stop feeding the beast. I think the average life of a Twitter post or an X post is like 14 seconds, right? So,
Wow.
I mean, it's just crazy. So you have to start churning out information, and it's got to be engaging. It's got to be interesting to look at, interesting to read. It needs to be new. And when you start thinking about, the amount of work it takes to produce just one quality social media prompt, from creating imagery to writing those prompts to making sure it aligns with your brand and your your brand statements and all that stuff, and making sure everything is done times 52. And that's just one social media platform, right? That's a lot of work. And then you multiply it times all the various social medias that are out there, and it becomes a mountain of work.
Hmm.
So I always caution people and say, as long as you can stay off social media and still get your word out, then do it. Or just pick one where you think that social media is going to, really impact your audience,
Hmm.
because it's a massive amount of work to do well. Um, However, I can say for Brainy that social media has been a huge positive influence for us, for our company. Most of the work that we have gotten over the past 5 years has come from social media, from people seeing our work out on various platforms, contacting us via those platforms, not even through our own website, but through those platforms directly, being able to communicate and connect with people almost instantaneously via some of these platforms like Twitter, like Facebook. It has been a huge, huge blessing for us as a company. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one side, it's a huge amount of work. It's a huge amount of time and expense because we want to do it really well.
Yeah.
But also on the other side, we almost probably wouldn't be the company that we are today without social media, as sad as that is to say. So
Yeah. No, I feel that struggle. I would love to delete social media, but then there's those times where it's like that's the reason I'm
yeah,
getting certain jobs is because of that. So,
you got it. That's exactly right. Now, what we do is we will analyze kind of how we're doing on a social media platform, and we may drop one off of
mhm.
our roster because we've got accounts everywhere. Like I think recently we just dropped Minds,
Okay.
which is a very conservative, tends to be very political social media platform. But we weren't really getting any engagement there. We'd been on there a couple years. We'd made probably a couple thousand posts, and just wasn't really getting any traction or engagement. And so we said, why are we continuing to kind of throw, pearls after swine here? Do we want to continue to do this? And we said, well, let's not. Let's focus our efforts elsewhere. So I would encourage people, if you are on multiple platforms, to do a quarterly review. How are your metrics on those platforms? Maybe even set some goals for those platforms. And if you don't meet them, maybe it's time to, dust your sandals and walk away from those folks. So
For sure.
to use a biblical reference.
Yes. Yeah. So then my final question is just if people, after listening to this, are interested in getting in touch with you guys with their next project, how can they connect with Brainy Pixel?
Well, first they have to send Micah $50, and then no, so yeah, just brainypixel.com is our website. We would love to chat with anybody out there. About 80% of the work that we do at Brainy is actually service work. So it's for ministries and for organizations and for individuals who want something made. Maybe it's an animation, maybe it's a comic, maybe it's curriculum, maybe it's just a children's book, maybe it's a painting. Whatever you dream, we can help you bring it to life. Although we're going to probably want to do something that's biblical or at least isn't anti-biblical. But brainypixel.com is our website. You can go there and see a ton of information about what we've done in the past, see our past customers, testimonials, see lots of our work that we have done, although it's woefully out of date, but that's the power of the NDA. So soon, hopefully it will be updated. And also on social media, we're on just about every social media platform except for Minds now, as I've mentioned that one. We're technically still on Minds. We just don't pay any attention to it for a while. But we're either at Brainy Pixel, all one word, or at Brainy Pixel Productions, either one of those. And we're very, very active on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Those are probably the three biggies where we're at all the time. So we'd love to connect with you, love to help you however we can. Also, if you're an artist, if you're a Christian creative, we would love to connect with you. We've been blessed to build a very large database of Christian creatives, and people are getting to the point where they actually will email me looking for someone to do work for them. And so I'm happy to refer people because I want to keep Christians working in the creative arts and creating things that glorify God. Just this morning, for instance, I was able to connect a guy with a comic colorist.
Okay.
And I just met her a couple of days ago and was able to make that connection. That's something they're doing together. We're not involved, but I'm happy to keep folks working. So if you're a creative, if you're a Christian creative and you want to be a part of, the Brainy database and the community, we would love to connect with you. Just head to our website and drop me a message. And yeah, I'll set up a meeting and we'll chat and I'll throw you in the database.
Cool, cool.
Mike is in there. He's in the database. So.
All righty. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of the show. So thank you once again, Brannon, for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Micah. It's always a pleasure. Looking forward to, if the Lord wills, the next time.
With that, we're going to wrap up this season of the Producer Podcast. Thank you to all of our season 9 guests of the show. Can't wait for more Producer Podcast content? Then pick up your copy of the book written off the show, The Producer's Life, A Practical Guide to Film Producing. Make sure to join us in 2025 for our can't miss 10th season of the show as the countdown to the 100th episode begins. Until then, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast, and thanks for listening.